So, Canada, as you know, went to vote in Monday's election in a vote that was largely dominated by talks of how Canadians would respond to Donald Trump's tariffs and talks of annexing Canada to become the 51st state. Well, I wanted to talk with somebody about the relationship that Canada shares with the United States. I mean, we have existed side by side for over 150 years. So, how long does our history go back? What relationship did we share before this year? And what can be done to repair that break in relations? Well, I looked into it and I found somebody to talk to. Let me pull up his name real quick, make sure that I am pronouncing it correct. Because, as you know, I'm very bad with names. But I spoke with James Endersby. He's the professor of political science at the Truman School of Government and Public Affairs at the University of Missouri. Um, why University of Missouri? Well, I took his class a couple of years ago, and it was Canadian politics and government. He seemed like he'd be a good expert to talk to about this. So let's go ahead and listen in what he had to say.
Now, obviously, I wanted to do this interview with you because of your expertise in the area of U.S. and Canada relations and Canadian history and politics in general. So, as you know, U.S. Canada relations have been in the headlines for the past few months for several reasons. Firstly, President Donald Trump, has put in place several tariffs on Canadian imports and, more controversially, has repeatedly raised the idea of Canada becoming the 51st state. Now, Prime Minister Mark Carney, whose Liberal Party government was just returned to power in Monday's federal election, said earlier this year that, quote, the old relationship we had with the United States is over. Now, historically speaking, how deep do Canadian US relations run in terms of culture, diplomacy, and their shared economy?
The United States and Canada are intricately related. They're related on a diplomatic front, that we're largely on the same side on most foreign issues. We are deeply embedded militarily together. We have joint operations, joint forces for like protection of the North American airspace. On trade, there's been a movement over many decades now, certainly since the Reagan administration, but arguably even since before then, to really have an integrated North American economy where sort of the walls have fallen down between the two countries. So the recent administrative moves to build more trade barriers is uncharacteristic of the relationship between the United States and Canada in recent decades.
And I wanted to get your take on this idea of Canada becoming the 51st state. Does the idea of Canadian annexation by the US have any sort of popular support within Canada or even historically speaking?
No, certainly not now, and not as a suggestion from the outside. I think sort of if we were to think long term, and by long term I'm thinking like a century ahead, one can certainly imagine that North America generally might be more like Western Europe in creating more of a European Union where there's free movement of people and goods. But we're nowhere near there yet. But I think that was the original goal, is to move more towards that sort of model. Because we are such close allies sitting here, we're sitting next door to each other. We're neighbors in the neighborhood, and we're trying to improve the neighborhood overall. But the whole idea of Canada as being the 51st state does not go over well with Canadians at all. That said, I think there are parts of Canada, particularly in the West, that, like a lot of the things that are going on in the United States, lower taxes, more ability to extract natural resources, which Canada limits somewhat more than we do in the United States. So there's a segment of the country that has had at least a much more positive view of the United States. But the notion from the president of suggesting that we were going to take over Canada has not gone well. If anything, the effect has been more unity and more nationalism within Canada. So it seems closer relations are more distant now than they were in the past.
Piggybacking on that last comment you made about how Trump's talk of annexation has led to more nationalism and Canadian unity, we've seen how Canadian businesses have begun to promote buying Canadian in response
Yes.
to President Trump's tariffs. We have citizens that are boycotting American products and even travel to America altogether. Do you see these boycotts as having an impact here in the U.S.? Are Americans taking notice in any
Uh,
meaningful way?
these kind of things all take time, but yeah, I think they will. The travel issue will probably be the first one. It does get rather cold in Canada for a significant portion of the year. So we have a lot of Canadians, often referred to as snowbirds, that travel down to Texas or Arizona or Florida or South Carolina when the weather gets bad in Canada. So they spend a long time here. They tend to come to the United States for summer travel. We're cheaper. We have lots of opportunities for Canadians. And going to Europe or Asia is much more expensive. Um, and I think that's where we'll see the hit first is we do get a lot of money from Canadian tourists and Canadian short-term residents coming to the United States, and that's probably going to hit us first. The impact of buying Canadian goods versus American goods is probably going to hit the northern border states first before it comes down to us in the Midwest and in Missouri and Texas. But unfortunately, it will probably reach us too. Hopefully, some sort of trade accommodations can be made before that situation gets too bad.
All right. Well, earlier on, I did mention Monday's federal election, where Prime Minister Carney was seeking a mandate to take on the Trump administration. To me, it kind of evoked memories of when Theresa May in the UK called that snap election in 2017 to have a strong mandate to negotiate Brexit. But I guess in this case, it actually succeeded because while the Liberal Party failed to win a majority of seats in the legislature, they did win the popular vote, and they just ended up, I believe, 3 seats short of a majority government. My question to you is, how do you interpret these results? Do you think that Canadians sent a message to America in Monday's vote?
Most definitely. In fact, a few months ago, it looked like the Liberal Party, which at that time was under Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, it looked like the Liberal Party was going to lose badly in the election to the Conservative Party. And I know for many of your audience, it sounds funny. Liberal and Conservative are actually the names of the parties in Canada. It's not ideology, although it's associated with ideology, it's the names of the party. And the Conservative Party looked like it was going to win big. And to be honest, I think the Conservative Party of Canada would be more aligned with many of the goals of the Trump administration. However, it's the threats of economic sanctions of various kinds, the lack of economic cooperation between the two countries, and in particular, the hostility towards Canada's own independence that sort of bolstered the Liberal Party's standing in the polls, particularly after Justin Trudeau resigned and exited, and Mark Carney came on as the Liberal Party leader. I think it had an effect on the outcome of the election. A few months ago, we would have predicted that the Liberals were going to lose badly in the April 28th election, and it flipped around so that the Liberals really did surprisingly well, and as you noted, are going to be in charge of the government again.
I certainly have been keeping up with the polls for quite a few months, and at one point it looked like the Liberals were headed to a 2011 style defeat.
That was the prediction, is that the Conservative Party was going to win big. And to be fair to the Conservatives, they actually did fairly well in the election. I think the parties that were damaged the most were the smaller parties, including the New Democratic Party, which is a sort of more leftist social welfare party in Canada, and they did particularly poor. And the Quebec Nationalist Party, the Bloc Québécois, also lost seats. And so it was the third parties that suffered the most in this election. But the Conservative Party was predicted to win and did not.
Do you think that most of the siphoning of votes away from third parties to the Liberals and the Conservatives, do you think this could be attributed to the voters wanting to, at least for this election, support one of the two big parties to have a better chance of getting a unified result to take on the Trump administration?
We don't have the survey data and stuff. As a political scientist, we need to analyze the data a little bit more, but it seems clear that that's what went on in this election, is that many Canadians did not want to waste their votes by voting for a minor party and instead wanted to choose one of the two major parties because, to be fair, both the Liberals and the Conservatives were saying we're going to stand strongly against the United States and represent a united Canada. So there was clearly a message at the top. I think the third parties are also going to do the same thing, but I think voters were more concerned is that we need to have a government that can deal strongly with the American administration in the future. And that's part of what led to the Liberal Party victory.
And what do you think President Donald Trump should take away from Mark Carney's victory?
There are a lot of things I think that the Trump administration should be more aware of. And mainly it's that these are our allies, and we should not try to alienate our allies who are, for the most part, helping us with economic relations and other foreign policy domains. And I think the Trump administration needs to be aware that Canada will, in fact, react negatively when they are sanctioned economically or otherwise by the United States. They're going to resist these significantly. To be fair, it seems like the Trump administration seems to be getting that message a little bit because they're backing away off of some of the tariffs. We should also remember that the first Trump administration is the one that renegotiated NAFTA and lobbied for the treaty that we now have for goods and services between Canada, the USMCA, or as Canada calls it, CUSMA, the CUSMA. That was the first Trump administration. And that was, by Canadians, generally considered to be a very positive thing. And I think the Trump administration needs to reconsider its direction and go back to the direction that Trump had followed in the past, which is closer relations with Canada.
For the final few questions of this interview, I want to go back to Prime Minister Carney's statement that Canada's old relationship with the U.S. is over. Firstly, what do you think that means in practice?
In part, I think it is position taking, just like the Trump administration says we're going to impose all these sanctions, no negotiations, and I think it's partly rhetoric on the other side. I do think there is an understanding in Canada that we are not as a reliable trade and military partner as we used to be, and so I think what Carney's trying to signal is that they're going to seek out more trade with Europe and Asia and try to be less reliant on the United States. That will be difficult for the Canadian economy. I think it's going to be somewhat difficult for the American economy. But that's probably the future, and I think that's what he's trying to signal is we're not going to be, the lapdog of the United States anymore. We're going to follow our own economic policy.
Do you believe the Trump administration or future administrations can reverse this U.S.-Canada rift?
I certainly think it's possible. We've been close allies for so long, and we have joint interest in working problems out together. We have a long history of working problems out together. Think of all of the economic and environmental issues about free trade between the two countries, protection of the Great Lakes. We have the world's largest demilitarized border. There are lots of good things that the United States and Canada have adapted in the past. And this is a bump in the road, and we could go back to something that is much like it was in the past, and perhaps even something better. I think if we had Americans and Canadians sit down around the table and determine what are our mutual interests, our mutual benefits, and try to seek those out and make an even better association between the two countries. So I think that's certainly possible. I think it would be helpful on the United States to have some redirection of the policy between the two states. Perhaps we're seeing that now with the Trump administration. I wish we could see more of that.
Well, before I let you go, is there anything else you'd like to add? Maybe we didn't discuss?
We live in a great country, and we live in a great country in part because our neighbors are, for the most part, fairly easy to get along with, and they view their interests as aligning with our own American interests. That's important to remember. We often get caught up in the rhetoric, but everything is better in North America if we can get along. We have the greatest economy in the world. We have great partners in North America. We need to enhance that. And I think we have the opportunity to do that in the future.
Well, once again, thank you to James Endersby for that enlightening interview. Let's go